outright slavery. Eventually Colleen, now referred to in the house as Kay, was allowed to do household chores such as cooking, washing dishes, and cleaning up. Yet whenever Cameron yelled attention, she was to strip off her clothes, stand on her tiptoes, and reach her hands to the top of the doorway between the living room and dining room. She wore a slave collar and was supplied with a registration card, supposedly from the slave company. Cameron would tell her horror stories of things that had happened to slaves who disobeyed. One had her tongue taken out with a soldering gun, he claimed, another pulled limb from limb, and another her fingers torn off. Then one night, Cameron brought Colleen into the marriage bed. Janice tried to go along with the sex play, but ultimately she left and went into another room. That night, for the first time, Cameron raped Colleen. After that, he had regular sex with her. As he began to trust her not to run, Cameron gave her more time in the cramped workshop under the stairs, even allowing her to sleep there. But her freedom was short-lived. The Hookers moved into a trailer on a piece of land that provided more privacy, yet space inside was at a premium. To keep Colleen captive, Cameron designed a ventilated box that would fit under the couple's waterbed. This realm of near-sensory deprivation was Colleen's new home, and Cameron gave her a bedpan to use for her necessities. Like a prisoner in maximum security, she was allowed out for an hour each day to brush her teeth, eat, clean her bedpan, and sometimes wash her hair. Her only other respite was working outside in the yard on days that Cameron had off from work, but he kept an eye on her. He warned her that the company was always watching, and they would find her if she tried to run. Those neighbors who saw and spoke to her believed she was a live-in babysitter. And no time did she ask for help. She was even allowed to go jogging, and she always came back. Whatever the Hookers did on their waterbed, from sex to giving birth to their second daughter, Colleen could hear in her box. There was no privacy for her or for Janice. Cameron called the shots. Typically, Colleen just quietly did whatever she was asked, but sometimes she would make a mistake. For that, she would be punished with electrical wires that left small scars on her skin. Eventually, that would work to her advantage. A strange reprieve. Colleen asked for a Bible for Christmas one year, and Cameron complied. Every chance she got, she buried herself in its text. Cameron continued to tell her about the company and to subject her to things that would deepen his hold on her. He pierced her labia for identification purposes, although he told her it was symbolic of a wedding ring and that someday he hoped to have children with her. 3 years after her abduction, in 1980, Cameron allowed her to go out one night with Janice. They had some drinks, met some men, and went home with them. With Cameron's permission, Janice even carried on an affair with one of them. Both Cameron and Janice worked, but Janice lost her job, so Cameron decided to put his slave to better use. He took her to Reno and neighboring towns to make her beg for money in the streets. It was humiliating, but Colleen had no choice. She never exploited opportunities to request help. Then Janice found work, and Colleen was left alone at home to babysit. Again, although she was not tied up now, she did nothing to try to gain her freedom. At night, she was often chained to the toilet, sleeping on the floor of the back bedroom. It was hard, but it was better than the box under the bed. Janice brought work home and engaged Colleen to help her, thereby using her to bring in more money. However, the two women sometimes fought because Janice was jealous of Cameron's excessive attention to the younger woman. She wanted Cameron to let Colleen go. Cameron made Janice quit her job so she could watch the children, and Colleen returned to her life in the box under the bed. Cameron convinced her that he had paid the company $30,000 to ensure complete protection for her, which was a huge financial sacrifice, so she had better behave. Again, he reiterated that the company had put bugs into the cars, homes, and phone lines of all the members of her family to make sure she did not contact them to get help. One day, he decided to make sure Colleen knew her place by having her point a gun down her throat. Not knowing if it was loaded, she obeyed his command to pull the trigger. The empty metallic click sent a shock through her, and she knew that he might one day kill her. Cameron had Colleen say goodbye to all the neighbors to make them think she was going back to Southern California. They didn't know she was getting confined again to the trailer. Colleen missed her family, so as a reward for her obedience, Cameron allowed her to write 3 letters to her sisters to let them know she was alive. He checked the letters' contents before sending them out. He even let her call home once from a payphone, and eventually even arranged for a visit. He said it was rare that the company allowed such a thing, and they would be monitoring it carefully. She was left inside the box for a full week before being taken out to go on her trip. Cameron had warned her that the company might put her through some tests first, and he gave her a description of their museum of skeletons from other runaway slaves. Yet in the end, he said the company had decided to forego the tests, but if she said anything to anyone about her situation, they would rush in and grab her. On March 20th, 1981, 3.5 years into her captivity, Cameron provided Colleen with a cover story about him being a computer programmer with whom she was involved, and then took her to meet with her parents and sisters. Her father, utterly surprised to see her and this new boyfriend, who did not even wait to be introduced, noted her thin, haggard appearance. Afraid that they had offended her in some way to have made her disappear for so long, the family walked on eggshells, leaving their many questions unspoken. Colleen remained vague about where she had been, but she was overjoyed to see them all. She was not sure how long she had. She hoped for a whole weekend, but all she wanted was to make every minute count. She gave us no information on where she'd been, Janice recalled, or on where she'd be going. We were all afraid to sit her down and get it out of her. We were afraid we would lose her again. The next morning, she went to visit her mother, who lived a few blocks away and who took her to church and to see other relatives. Then it was over. Mike called and said he would be there soon to pick her up. After only 24 hours, he had decided to cut her visit short. When it came time for Cameron to pick her up to take her back to Red Bluff, she told her family that he was her fiancé. Her sister took a picture of the two of them, and she thought Colleen looked happy. She did not know how badly Colleen wanted to beg her for help. Time to leave. Her year of semi-free existence was over. Cameron put her back inside the box, and that's where she stayed most of the time for the next 3 years. Once she managed to kick open the bolted door, but grew afraid of what might happen to her. So she told Cameron what she had done. He fixed the damage without punishing her and forced her back inside. Her physical condition declined. Her hair fell out, and she lost more weight. As nice as it was for Cameron to have Colleen, he apparently wasn't satisfied. He talked about wanting more slaves, which meant he would need more space. He decided to build a dungeon, and he had Colleen help to dig a deep hole for it in the yard. He put in a floor and built brick walls, finishing it in November of 1983. He moved her into it, but when it flooded, Cameron saw how impractical it was, and once again he put Colleen back in her box. Yet there was a growing threat to which Cameron was blind. Janice disliked the fact that her husband was having regular sex with Colleen. To quiet her anger, she read the Bible. Soon she was reading it quite regularly. She began to feel increasingly more ashamed over what was going on in her home. Colleen turned 27. To her mind, this was now her life. She'd been with the Hookers for 7 years, with no end in sight. She began to receive small liberties again, and was even allowed to have an outside job working at the King's Lodge Motel. She was told the extra money would be spent on buying her a small house near the Hookers, which would be for her. Janice began attending a local Nazarene church, and Colleen sometimes went with her. Cameron, too, was biblically inspired, but only to emphasize his ownership of them both. He would say that this arrangement was what God wanted, including the sexual acts he had started to command between them. They couldn't help but think of the story of Abraham, Sarah, and Hagar from Genesis. Nevertheless, Janice knew that the situation was morally wrong, so she went to Pastor Frank Dabney and other members of her church for advice. Instead of revealing the full story, however, she framed it as a love triangle. They all let her know that God would not approve. That admonition began to work on her, and she finally formed a plan. On August 9th, 1984, Janice picked up Colleen at the King's Lodge. She told her that there was no company and no slavery contract. It was all lies. Colleen listened to this and realized that nothing now bound her to Cameron. She abruptly quit her job and left with Janice. She stayed one more night, asking Cameron to allow her and Janice to sleep alone. He complied. They used the time to plan Colleen's escape, to be effected the following day while Cameron was at work. Colleen called her father in Riverside to ask for money to buy a ticket to come home. He wired it immediately. With ticket in hand, she then called Cameron from the bus station. She told him she knew he had been lying all along and she was leaving. Cameron cried, but Colleen was not to be deterred. She walked away from 7 years of forced captivity to try to find her life again. I got on the bus and I left. The truth comes out. Colleen returned to her parents, not saying a word to the authorities about what she had been through. She also did not tell her family, and she stayed in touch with Janice Hooker by phone. Janice asked her to keep the whole thing quiet, at least until she knew what she herself was going to do. Cameron scared her, but she wanted to leave. Cameron and Janice, at first separated and then reunited. Then they began to get rid of any evidence that Colleen had ever been there at their home. Whenever she called, Cameron begged her to come back, but she refused. Yet she assured the Hookers each time that she would not go to the police. As she dropped hints about her ordeal to her parents, they began to urge her to turn these people in. Her cousins made threatening calls to the Hookers. Colleen told Cameron that she forgave him and that she would pray for him to stay away from his life of sin. Yet she did nothing further. Then Janice left Cameron again, this time for good. Her fear and guilt had eaten away at her. She needed to talk with someone, and she chose the receptionist at a doctor's office. They talked for almost 2 hours, and the receptionist thought she was asking for help. She encouraged Janice to go ahead and tell her what was really bothering her, so Janice let the truth out. Having told one person, and having become frightened about what might happen to her 2 daughters, Janice went straight to Pastor Dabney to confess everything. He was stunned, and with her permission, he phoned the police. Detective Al Shamblin arrived at the church. For the first time, Janice mentioned Cameron's connection to the 1976 disappearance of a young woman from the area named Marie Elizabeth Spanhake. She knew of her nickname, Merly Eyes, and accurately depicted other details. The prosecuting attorneys knew they would need Janice's help in pinning the charges on Cameron. So in return for testifying against her estranged husband, they granted her immunity from prosecution. She then told a detailed story about the abduction of Spanhake. It started much like Colleen's abduction, but Cameron had shot her in the stomach and then strangled her to death. He drove quite a while, Janice recalled, before he dumped the body. Yet even with Janice's assistance, the police did not find the woman's remains. Janice told them about Colleen and how her husband had brainwashed the girl to keep her under his control. She provided more details, including how she had helped to destroy evidence. So detectives went out to investigate. One team questioned neighbors who insisted that Cameron was nice, normal, and good-tempered, while Shamblin went to Riverside to talk with Colleen. He found her to be lucid and helpful, if disturbingly detached. She corroborated Janice's story, but Deputy District Attorney A. Christina McGuire found real problems. Colleen had had ample time to escape, and upon getting to Riverside, she never even contacted the police. But then as McGuire was thumbing through a sketchbook taken from Hooker's trailer, a slide fell out. It was a photograph of a slavery contract, a document that Janice had said had been destroyed. Here it was preserved and ready for the evidence file. They also had slides of Janice being hung and bound in various ways. Another interview with her revealed that Cameron had stalked more women with the intention of making more slaves. 2 rolls of undeveloped film confiscated from Cameron's stash were sent to the FBI for processing. They contained some pictures of Colleen in captivity, including photos of her naked and hooked to the ceiling or on the rack. This case was looking better and better. On November 18, 1984, Detective Shamblin drove to the Hooker's residence and arrested Cameron. Defense attorney Roland Papendick was retained for him.